What up, friends? It's like Uncle Robin Black here today. You all the winter vibes going. It's a little cold outside. I don't know if it's going to be cold in New York, but I'm heading there tomorrow. GSP versus Michael Bisping. We also got some TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, Rose Namajunas. Sometimes I would like to call her Rose Namajunas, but her name is Rose Namajunas. Huge fan. And Joanna Jędrzejczyk. We'll talk about those. Those are coming out in the next day or so when you look at this. But we looked at George versus Michael Bisping. But I want to look at Michael Bisping. I just want to spend 10, 15, 20 minutes and just really... This guy doesn't get the appreciation he deserves. Never really has. It's partly because he is loud and brash, and it's a personality-driven thing. But this is a brilliant fighter. This is a brilliant special fighter. And so this is GSP Bisping analysis part 2, but I think we're just going to do a real deep a dive as we can right now into some Michael Bisping. Also, if you are in Canada, maybe you saw our doc. We spent 6 months gathering stuff on George St-Pierre. I've also got a couple breakdowns. One's probably up right now at UFC.com. So I've been like nothing. George, I've been spent a lot of time with George. Trained with him, followed him around for this doc. It's out now, probably be out internationally soon. Did analysis breakdowns, UFC.com, TSN. I've been doing a lot of George St-Pierre analysis. Never get tired of it. One of the greatest of all time and one of the coolest dudes you'll ever meet. But with so much of that, what it makes me realize is how little I know about Michael Bisping, and I know more than 99.999% of the planet. Now, that's taking into account that 99% of people don't watch fighting at all, or know who Michael Bisping is. But I still don't know a lot about him. Because everything, the more you see when you are up close, if you got a chance to go in and shadow Dwayne Ludwig with TJ Dillashaw for 6 weeks, you'd be like, oh my God, I've seen so much. It would make you realize how little you'd seen of the other guy. So training with George, rolling with George, training karate with George, analyzing George with Freddie Roach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, looking back at his old fights, anticipating the changes. We didn't see any of that with Mike. I've been a huge fan for a long, long time. Bisping is there's something special when you watch him fight, and you need to, I say that sometimes, I was going to say, you need to appreciate that. You don't need to do anything. I'm not here to tell you what to do. You don't need to do that. But I would urge you to do that. Because you're watching one of the great fighting men in the world. And don't let a bias or an accent or what he said about one of your favorite fighters change that. That doesn't change that. It might change your perspective, but it doesn't change the fact that you're looking at one of the great fighting men in the world. And at a genetic level and at a mental level, you know, who he is, the fight that's in him. That's why he became so great, is the raw materials of what a Michael Bisping is. You know, it's just in him to fight. It's in him to get better. It's in him to learn to fight. It's in him to push through things. You can't break him. So there's all of these things. So I have the really good fortune to get a chance to talk to some really interesting people. And I'll never take that for granted. We talked to Dr. Stu McGill. Last week, it's on the YouTube channel. He is a spine specialist and a specialist in the nervous system. Gathered some information there. Had a conversation with Coach Firas Zahabi, not back in Montreal. Get to sit around with some of these fighters and talk with them. But I also have friends that are experts in fighting in different ways than I am. And over at the UFC, a couple of friends I've made over the years, a couple of good ones, Matt De La Rosa, Perino, Anthony Petosa, and a guy named Ant Evans. So Perino's newer, maybe only under 10 years. Some of these other guys have been there from day one, like Ant and Petosas. So you can gather, they're like historians. So, and I will get some of these guys. I've had Perino and sat with him, and I'll get some of these guys at some point. You should meet some of these people. And I know how to draw these stories out of them. So I start talking to Ant. So Ant Evans runs Fight Pass. He's ended up kind of, I don't know what the actual title is, but he's kind of the guy who takes care of what's on it. And we chatted a little bit over phones, and he's a very big Michael Bisping fan. And he's a friend with him personally, but to get through his eyes. So I look at Bisping and I go, wow, look at how well the left hook works. Look how tough he is in these things. Look at his mental toughness. I've studied his energy system. I've got a breakdown of how he's like a middle distance runner. The aerobic, anaerobic sort of balance is near perfect in the way that he fights. It's because of the way he trains, and it's because of the way he pushes himself that's so. So I've looked at these things, but then as Ant, like Patosas and others, it ends up being like a historian, Matt De La Rosa too. They end up being historians because they've been there since day one. They can tell you all these moments, these different moments. So I'm chatting with Ant, and he says to me, Michael Bisping versus Elvis Sinasek at UFC 70, Dennis Kang at 105, Jorge Rivera at 127, CB Dollaway in Montreal or Quebec City. Oh, actually, no, yeah, wherever it was. UFC 196, Anderson Silva in London, and Dan Henderson at UFC 204. What do those 6 fights have in common? And, you think about them, and all of a sudden you start thinking about those and Chael and a few others, and you think of the fight in Mike. Not just the skills, or not just the way he uses tools and weapons or whatever, but just the fight that's in him. That is so what I love watching about him. Sorry, I've got a different chair today. It's a little squeaky. My apologies. But those 6 fights, Mike was dropped in all of them. And Mike won all of them. You drop him. He doesn't give a shit. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. It's not relevant to him. It doesn't change in any way the way he expresses his character. He just fucking goes in and fights. And we don't all do that. In fact, none of us do that. Almost none of us. Even the greats. And what is interesting here is that George has to overcome himself to do this. Mike may as well. He just might not talk about it. He'll maybe talk to me about it when he retires in a year or 30, depending on how this guy wants to fight. Maybe he'll talk. Maybe he'll tell me about it. Maybe he'll let me ask the right questions to get into some truth of who he is and why he is this way. Because we're, as much as I said, it's genetic. We aren't born like this. We're made. You're forged. Michael Bisping's character has been forged through choices he's made and the way he's lived his life and the things he's learned, some good fortune to be around the right person at the right time, but he's forged this. And this is why you watch him fight. Interestingly, don't underestimate George. If you saw the doc, we talk a lot about his fear and anxiety. Those are all real. Everybody feels it. If Michael Bisping doesn't, he's the only one, or one of very few. You talk to the most savage of them, Jorge Masvidal, he feels that. He's that fear, that anxiety, that holy shit, this is a fight, right? It's happening. But Bisping was forged this way, and it's not relevant. The fact of what happened 10 seconds ago or last round, he got dropped, doesn't change how he fights. That is how he fights. So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And Hendo knocked him down twice, incidentally. And he came back to win those fights. That's something you don't learn about checking a low kick, or putting together a combination, or training your energy systems. Although being fit and gutsy with how you use your breath does help with those kinds of things. But that getting up when you got knocked down, I think it was the Reem. And I know he didn't invent this, but he got it somewhere. But get knocked down 17 times, get up 18. That's so inspiring. Think of that when you watch Michael Bisping fight. Think of what that means to you. You're literally, and I love, we're going to talk about Mike's left hook. We're going to talk about, the way that he boxes and how the mentality and the choices of his wrestling. We're going to talk about all that stuff. But it is more than that. When you see a man get dropped 17 times and get up 18, that's a lesson for your life. That is a lesson for the way to live your life. I feel like I'm just like a university professor in this. And I know I'm not of that intellect, but it's fun. I wish I had a pipe right now, like a pipe. But yeah, that's a lesson for how to live your life. I know that's not necessarily why people watch fighting, but it's there if you want it. So that was one thing about Bisping. He's the oldest fighter to become a UFC world champion for the first time. Did you know that, Mark? Yeah, oldest guy ever to first time get it. Now, of course, Yeah, for the first time. Yeah, Randy, but he got it for the second time. Or second? Yeah. Yeah. So, and this is something I want to talk about a little bit. This, to me, of course, I draw inspiration from these people, and you learn about how you can learn a philosophy of making choices and staying inspired and stuff. That's fucking there. Every time you watch fights, if you look for it, and you shouldn't need to look for it. It's there, just feel it. But beyond that, there is this magical, technical thing that is also happening. And we phase in and out. The way that I watch fights now, and the way that I study them, and the way that I, draw inspiration from them and is you phase in and out of very technical, and then sort of esoteric, and then very physical, and then mental or psychological, and then big picture, and then small picture. Greg Jackson was talking to me about that about a year ago December, when Cub and Du Ho Choi fought, about how he'll never get tired of it, because whatever his perspective is at the time will change. Which is why I always think that we can't stop somewhere. Okay, cool. We all know, we know how to describe striking and wrestling and takedowns, so let's just do that on TV forever. And then the audience can do that, and we'll all just do that. No, you want to keep going further. What else is there? What does it mean? So, but this is something interesting about Bisping. So Michael Bisping, you think of Michael Bisping, Orthodox fighter. Michael Bisping is left-handed. I don't know how universally that's known. And he's not the only one. There are others, left-handed Orthodox. So think of what that means. So when you go, Mark, you're left-handed. When you go to train, day one, which hand are you? Okay, well, you step back with that one. So you go in, and they'll train you to step back and position your strong hand back. Bisping went into whatever karate class or whatever he was doing and just started doing what everyone else did for weeks and weeks. Nobody ever mentioned it somehow, and then he was doing that, so he just did it always. And I know other guys like that, and there's a few. One, I will say it now because I think I have said it, and he's not fighting currently, but Mitch Gagnon is one of those. He's a Canadian fighter, UFC fighter. If you're not aware, you can look him up. Fantastic fighter. And I remember I was saying that I wanted to discuss that in the breakdown, and Evan Boris and Rory McDonald, who are two of his coaches, were like, do you need to give that away? But then they also said, he was fighting Barao at the time, and they're like, Pedinaros probably knows. A good coach does know. So I'm sure Faraz knows. I'm sure George knows, although it's never come up when I've been talking about Bisping. So, but he is left-handed, and he fights left-hand forward. He's not alone in this. And in fact, this kind of shit fascinates me, by the way. So why are stairs? So you've seen an old castle? Old castle, what do you call those, like, circular staircase that goes up? I don't know what you call that. The spiral staircase. Yeah, Stu's like spiral. It's like, I know it, I got that word. I got spiral. But the staircase itself in a castle may have a name. But it is a spiral staircase. So when you think of it, as you go up them during times of war, you go up this way. And they come down this way. And it forces you to fucking use your sword in your left hand. And they get to use it in their right. Think how fucking smart that is, right? You design those things, so I'm fighting my way up that staircase. I have to go this way because the wall is there. I have to go around this way. I can't go around this way. Well, you can, but it's not going to work. But coming down it the other way, I'm coming down this way. So the guys defending the castle are fighting with the sword in their right hand. The guys trying to take the castle are forced to fight with the sword in their left hand. The left-right thing in combat has been one of the most fucking historically fascinating things ever. You could just smoke one right now and just start Googling Southpaw, history, sword, fighting, combat, karate, boxing, and you just see what a massive genetic advantage it is to be left-handed. Because Stu, you're left-handed? Yeah, Mark's left-handed? Fuck. Check this out. Because when I go to take that castle, we're sending the left-handed guys in. Maybe sucks. Maybe it's not historically all that great if you get killed because you got to be the guys going up the stairs. But if you got a left hand, you've now evened it up. And in fact, that's where the advantage comes in. Why is it an advantage to be a southpaw? In the day, I do 10 rounds. Let's say I do 10 5-minute rounds. Nobody does. Actually, that's not true. People do. But A very common thing at most of the big gyms now. On Saturday nights, they do 5 5-minute rounds with a 1-minute break. And that's what you do. But let's just say we did 10. 8 of those are against righties. So 80% of the time, I'm training against people who have right hand. Well, those guys, the southpaw, 80% of the time they're against righties. So 80% of the time they are training to beat you. And you only get to train 20% of the time, the special experience to beat them. See that? Imagine that over 1,000 hours. I got 200 of training specifically to beat you. You got 800 of training to beat me. It's very simple, right? So that is why, and this is one of my favorite jokes. I think I got it from Evan, but I got it from one of these other fight nerds. What did the southpaw say when he saw the southpaw? Ah, fuck, it's a southpaw. Because they don't do it either. They only get 20% against southpaws. So even southpaws have that extra challenge. Now, this is all becoming less of a challenge, as this isn't a challenge for any of Dwayne's guys. They switch all the time. There is no stance. There's either 3 stances or no stance, depending on how you talk about it. And I was texting with Dwayne, and I'll see him in New York, and I'll try to get something on the phone for him. It might end up being on Periscope, but I will get something in New York with Dwayne. I was texting him to get some more TJ insight, but I don't want to take hours of this guy's time when TJ's fighting this weekend, but I can't talk to him for 10 minutes because they'll just fucking wreck my brain. Like I'll have too many questions. Right? So I said, hey, is it cool if I gather some insight? And his texts literally are exactly the same way that he seems. Yes, sir. Like you can hear it in his text. But he's brilliant, right? So 1 stance, 2 stance, or 3 stance, the space, the moving in between stances, or you call it no stance because they're all stances. Every single position of your feet in any way and your hips and your shoulders is in and of itself something. So we limit our brain if we say, you're southpaw, you're orthodox, you switch. Realistically, in southpaw, there could be thousands of stances depending where we position you. And this is how Dwayne thinks, by the way. I'll talk with... probably tomorrow we'll have a TJ versus a Garbrandt one coming up, and I got some pretty interesting, cool things I've been thinking about with that, trying to wrap my head around it without taking Dwayne's time right now. So anyways, so we get back to Bisping. I'm sorry, Mike, if you're watching this going, well, where's all the good stuff about me? So he's left-handed, right? And so his forward hand is his power hand because he never got switched back. Bruce Lee believed that was the best way to fight. And he's not only not the only guy, but not the only champion either. Robbie Lawler is a southpaw who's actually right-handed. So he is the opposite of Bisping. You also notice, especially in his early days, you go look at his highlight reel of just almost just like, just destroying people. I was going to say disintegrate, but that just sounds a little harsh. It was almost all right hands, right hooks. That was that dude's weapon. Strong hand, forward hand. Bruce Lee believed that was the best. He may not believe that if he had been able to examine everything we see now, or he might. Especially since everybody, 99% of them have their power hand back. You're different, and different is good. Different is hard for your opponent. So Mike now has the left hand forward, and for years, you notice he's been dropping guys. He's been knocked out Rockhold. He's apparently been knocking guys out in training. Perillo is the guy. And he's the guy Mike's needed his whole life. Everything else Mike learned was of all great value by the day he met Perillo. But Jason Perillo has rebuilt his game around his left hook. All these people trying to get him to have a stronger straight right. They're all trying to figure out how to get him to have a stronger cross. Fuck that. The cross is there to set up the left hand. The cross exists. You become different then. You are now a different fighter. Because instead of jab sets up my power hand, and hook is there to create old school thinking. This thing, which you are sensitized and you feel is my power hand and represents something, it actually represents something different. It's a tool for me to use my big weapon. And now it's fucking left hook. Left hook on Luke Rockhold, over top of Luke's extended right hand. Luke was fucking slaying everybody, playing off that check hook, floating out there and combining it with the left kick to the body. Left kick to the body, check hook. For a while, Luke didn't even need other tools. He was so fucking good at that. And Mike and Perillo, and Mike has some other very talented coaches that he trains with. A guy named Jorge, that is here in Canada. Jorge's kind of quiet and isn't always selling himself. But George has trained with him. Mike has trained with him. Rashad has trained with him. He knows what he's doing. And Mike was here shooting XXX, like 10 days out when he took the fight with Rockhold. He was in bars getting drunk and stuff, hanging out, living his life, eating pizza. Dude worked with Jorge here and Jason, and they built him a thing based around the tool. So he's different. He's different. The fucking left hook is the thing. And of course, everything he does is dangerous, and he expresses it so violently. But Perillo created a game that, you got a big puncher. He's got a big right hand. Much of the game directs to that. Conor McGregor is a perfect example. He's very different now, but when we first started examining him before he had reached these new levels of growth, it was all just there to shoehorn you into the straight left because he's a southpaw. Boom, power in the left. Mike is a left-handed orthodox fighter, so it's all there to shoehorn him into that fucking left hook. It's fucking beautiful. And he's different. And you have to be ready for that. I don't know if George and Faraz and Freddie know he's left-handed. I assume they do. But they do know that he is unbreakable. And they're ready for that. George is prepared for that. He understands that you got to red line him for 25 minutes. Anyways, the fight is going to be mind-blowing. But please don't get an opinion about Mike based on something other than how special he is. He's fucking special. We're lucky to have him. We're lucky to see him. We're lucky to have this fight. George knows how that's the case. And the narrative that Mike will give you, it's a good one, and it's good. And Mike's smart. George doesn't want to be here. He thinks that was an easy fight. George does not. No cameras on, hanging out, being honest, in the gym, sitting on the floor after you sweat. He knows what Mike is. That changes things. For Mike's narrative to work, George goes in and he's shocked at him. George won't be. One thing George has never done since Matt Serra is underestimate somebody. He has been guilty of overestimating opponents. He believed he overestimated Dan Hardy and Matt Hughes the first time before the Serra fight. Not that that's a criticism to either of those great martial artists. That's just what George believes, and it affected him, and he performed less well because of it. But he could be at risk of overestimating Mike, which makes your fight harder, but he is at no risk of underestimating Mike. And he shouldn't, because Michael Bisping's fucking special. And I'm a huge fan, and I will be for life. And I hope he does fight, win or lose, at least one or two more times, because especially if it's in England. I'm flying to England to see that if it's his last fight. But we will wrap it up there. This one, enjoy it. It doesn't matter about these titles and interim this and champion that and calling out. When you get two brilliant martial artists and put them in a cage together, that's what matters. I laughed at the shit Colby Covington said, but I also laughed mostly at, that's the oldest trick in the book. Roll into town and fucking tell off everybody and get them to boo you. Oldest trick in the book, and to get a reaction. That stuff's all neat, what the guy's wearing or who he called out or the kind of crazy shit Colby said and how they manipulate the mic and the press and the audience to get what they want. That's all great. Good for them. But this is what it's about. This is what it's really about. And this is what it's going forward. It needs to be about, because all that other shit will come and go. It'll get boring, or it'll be so repetitive, or it won't capture people's imagination anymore, or whatever. But the beauty of the fight itself will always be there. And that's what this one is. And please enjoy the hostilities, my friends.